Good evening, Council. We are taking the team approach for this study item. Gabrielle Myers, our senior planner, Greg Mendonça with the Urban Tree Foundation, who's our primary landscape architect. I'm working with him for Heroes Park and throughout the process with Hidden Valley, and Mr. Waters, our deputy city manager here. So we'll get started. So we are seeking council's direction really on two items this evening. One is we're going to go through potential phasing of the Hidden Valley Park expansion and any direction from councils on the modification to that phasing. And again, the word is potential. So we're going to throw some things out. And then second, funding strategies. So we always get to the point where, like, this is really nice. How are we going to pay for it? And so we've been working with the Trust for Public Land now for a few years. In 2022, they did a financial feasibility study, which identifies potential funding sources. And we've talked about CFDs. We've talked about special election measures. There's lots of different mechanisms. Spoke with them last week, and they actually have agreed to, if council's direction, move forward with updating that, and it could be more specific to this item. And really at no cost to us, and it just requires a formal request for technical assistance from the mayor. So I'll put that out there now, and we'll come back to that once we're done. Okay, first things first. There are a lot of things that have to be done that are really identifying unknowns. And I'm going to let, the environmental studies and rezoning is a big part of that, because we've got to determine, number one, what would be the impacts of this project on that site. And that can include biological, traffic, noise, air quality. And all of those will be identified through the environmental studies / rezoning. As you know, we've been working a bit concurrently with the rezoning, and the question comes up, where are we at? And so I'll let Jason give you a brief update. We do have an item later tonight on this matter.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. At this time, we've prepared documents for the rezoning. We made a presentation to the Planning Commission regarding the rezoning and the general plan amendment associated with that. Prior to that, we had to take several steps because of the state regulations associated with no net loss of housing. Because we're removing housing availability from the city, we had to do a shuffle to find housing in other areas. So we were able to identify another area where we might be able to find housing. However, at this time, before it proceeds any further for final approval for the zoning and the general plan amendment, we will have to undertake an environmental study to determine the impacts. So we have done the initial steps, but before we can finalize anything, the environmental process will need to take place. And that will be an item to consider later tonight on the agenda.
So once we get that completed, I put up there, we don't know what we don't know yet. And that's why the studies are so important. We really don't. So you open up the can a little bit and take a look. And it might be minor and it could be major. We just don't know. From that, though, we could develop a scope of work. And really, that is specific to the goals, the deliverables, the tasks, costs, deadlines, and all of that. We'll need the scope if we are to go out for design. Because whoever's going to design it, and we would go out to open bid, we'll need to know what are they bidding on? What is the scope of the work? So that's kind of the sequential order of where we need to go. This is before we even get real specific about any of the phasing you're going to see here in just a second. And I'm going to let, I'll do one more slide here. And just for council's reference, this is concept S5 developed by Greg. And on August 6th, this is what council agreed upon. Now, this is, again, negotiable and changeable and can be amended, but this is what we were basing the 3 phases that you're going to see. That's like the end product of a totally reimagined Hidden Valley Park. That includes developing of the vacant 18 acres and some renovating of the existing park. So that's what you're going to see here as Greg walks you through the 3 different phases. Okay? I'll turn it over to Greg.
Brett, hang on a second. If you can go back to the previous slide. The one thing that I want to clear up for the audience and for council as well, to the previous one, is the 3 phases that are up there, the 3 items that are shown are items that are necessary, but they're not necessarily in that order. For instance, at the Planning Commission meeting, the Planning Commission heard comments from the public that they were concerned about noise, and they're also concerned about traffic, specifically the extension of Rogers Road. And so that's why, in order to determine the ultimate build-out and what the needs would be for traffic circulation and noise mitigation, we need a scope of work. Later tonight, we have a contract for the environmental to be able to do, because we are running up against a deadline on that ARPA funding, and Hidden Valley Park is a qualifying project. So we wanted to get in front of you tonight with this. The phasing that you're going to see from staff and from Greg, the consultant today, is based on that Concept 5 that was approved by the previous council. If this council has any desire to make changes, it's important that we do come out with some direction, if not at this meeting, a subsequent study session, because that's ultimately what will be utilized to do the environmental studies. And it's important, if council intends to phase the project, that we also get some clear direction on that, because if there's no clear direction on the phasing, then any of the environmental mitigation that goes into the eventual project will have to be completed in the first phase. If there's growth over time and some phases that have been hashed out through the environmental process, it may allow us to push off some of those improvements to later phases before they truly need to be mitigated.
And now I'll let Greg walk you through the different phases.
All right, so getting into phase 1 here, we're taking that original plan and kind of just peeling it back and getting to a point of where we can set the framework for this park to have those elements that we can progress forward over the phases. So really what we're looking at here is getting a walking trail around that new 18 acres, getting the most basic sports field in there in an open area that can be a multi-use area, getting the first phase of 50 parking spaces so that we can accommodate new people coming in and the influx of parking that will be needed to get them off the street. Along with that, screening trees to kind of preserve the neighborhood and give a little bit of a buffer between the park and the neighborhood, and putting in some basic amenities like the restrooms.
I'm sorry, can we get you to speak directly into the mic?
Yeah. Putting in some basic amenities like the benches, restrooms, and drinking fountains, so we have those basic needs met for the rest of the park. Was there anything else I need to repeat? For phase 2, taking that first layout of parking and trails, we then develop it just a little bit further. We add a dog park into the new 18-acre section, putting that over on the railway corridor, and kind of pushing it out to that west side of the park. and opening up some space on the existing east side of the park. With this phase, also developing the full parking lot and bringing Rogers Road all the way through, so having that dual connection into the park. We would also redevelop some of the planting through the existing park, so adding some trees in, doing some trails that link, and so we have accessible access points back and forth through both sides of the park. And then in the new portion to the west, adding in baseball backstops and lighting for a sports field so that we have that for development of the future. And then coming into the final phase, which is what we first presented at S5, this was a redeveloped slightly, just adding in 4 diamonds rather than 2 there on the west side for baseball play. Adding in the artificial turf, soccer field, a multi-purpose field, and then finalizing additional play structures and redevelopment of the play area on the existing park, and redevelopment of that pond area, which is kind of in need of a facelift and some infrastructure to keep it clean and to keep it moving, in a good direction and maintainable for city workers.
Does council have any questions on just any of the 3 phases that Greg has just covered at all? We can go back and forth as much as you need to.
Okay. Question?
I have a question. Whenever you're talking about the pond, okay, you aren't talking about removing the pond, correct?
No.
Okay.
What we were looking at is actually, right now the pond is probably a couple feet higher than the whole rest of the park. And what we're looking at is finding a way to regrade that and reestablish the park in a way that it can be aerated, so it's just not a muddy mess, and it can be maintained better.
Can it be made bigger to where one of the residents had suggested taking and making the pond big enough to where they could take and have fishing tournaments? Is that a possibility?
We would have to look at the layout of it, but this is slightly bigger. It probably increases the pond by, I would say, about a quarter. And then we add some pavilions around the pond and some decks that extend over the edge. So it creates a little more accessibility for access to it.
I'd still rather if it was a little bit bigger. Because, I mean, if there's a way that we could take and have, I mean, there's a lot of kids in this town that have never gone fishing, have never seen the snow, have never seen the ocean. And if we can take and give them something like an opportunity to be able to learn how to fish,
Yeah.
I think it would be something good.
It's definitely something we can look at, yeah.
Thank you.
I had a question about phase 1. If we could go back to phase 1, why would we not, I mean, in phase 2 and phase 3, we're looking at extending out through Rogers Road. Why would we not do that during phase 1?
We were just looking at the initial build out. We weren't looking at, I think, one for cost, like looking at like what will be the total cost of the project, and really phase 1 being like, let's get a foothold in here. Let's get things set so that we can start the ball rolling.
Because I do like the idea of the grassy area, and I think that will activate the park a lot more, because you'll have a lot of sports teams that are vying for softball fields, baseball fields, soccer fields all the time, that they're going to be migrating over there. And I don't think a 50-stall parking lot might not be, large enough with the amount of activation there. I would like to see more so, maybe the full build out of the parking lot and connecting Rogers Road to the park, making it a thoroughfare, just because of the activation that will occur. Because with the dog park, I could see people like in that little roundabout, not a roundabout, like that cul-de-sac area.
Please don't use that word, Mr. Vice Mayor.
And so I just see the possibility of maybe having that as a consideration.
Yes.
And then also when you're talking about the the walking paths, that doesn't include anything with what the current park is. So there would be only a walking path solely.
So actually, I think I might have misspoke, but so we revised this. The first phase does connect pathways, and you can see them there that kind of go over to the bridge. So they link to the bridge and to the play structure. So we did address that.
Asphalt or cement pathway? Then?
I believe we did that as asphalt.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mayor, to follow up on the question regarding traffic, that's something, with the traffic analysis that takes place, it'll inform or could inform the design. We might have a better idea of what traffic volumes would exist under this current situation, and it very well may necessitate exactly what you
as
mentioned.
we're moving forward to the environmental, as Mario mentioned, I would see more so with the traffic patterns of like building out through Rogers Road and having that. Does it deal with fire, please? Public safety, if they need to get to a certain, location in the park, does that help them or, hinder them if they're coming from, through Rogers Road? No, I have to go all the way around,
Sure.
Through Portner. So
I've had a lot of people, because that's a district that I represent, I've had a lot of people take and approach me and tell me that they really want the park built, but they do not want to have that road go all the way through. And whenever we're talking about having a park where if it is a way that people can race through to get faster through there, you could take and potentially have faster traffic going through there whenever there's kids there that could be put in danger and everything. So it's something that needs to be taken into consideration.
one of my questions, and just piggybacking off of Councilwoman Regan's point, since this park it has usable hours, is that correct? From 6 in the morning until, is it 10
p.m.?
10 p.m. Is there some type of, gate that we could, have as an, so, I mean, this parking lot is off the main thoroughfare. I'm thinking public safety. I'm thinking loitering. I'm thinking anything that could happen in a secluded area of sorts, that we could have some sort of, once the park's closed, those gates close, and it will not be a full citywide thoroughfare that anybody can go through at any time. But I'm just thinking more so, it's the park's closed, there shouldn't be anybody there. And so anybody hanging out there, it'd be disruptive to the neighbors in that area as well.
There could be a possibility of days of use for that road and that connection where it's not open every day of the week, but for when there's like larger events and you're having, soccer games and things like that on the weekend, it does open up. But during the week, it does get closed back down. Fire would still have access. They'd be able to get through there. And so you would still have pedestrian access. So there's lots of ways.
Consideration.
So I think there's a lot of questions and still moving forward here, right?
There's a lot in development.
Right. So I guess what I'll start with here is I noticed in phase 2 that we show the perimeter wall surrounding what would be the south side there.
Yes.
Protect from the residents. Now that's in phase 2, if I'm reading this right. I think we've heard from constituents that have come and expressed concerns with the neighborhood that are there that will, butt up against the south side of the park there. I would like to definitely see that wall be placed in phase 1. I think that's, been a concern. What kind of impact the noise, and again, there's a lot of different feelers in there, right? But and where it's going to go. But I would like to definitely see that block wall be put in phase 1, address those issues up front for the community that, we can take care of that.
And I believe with the zoning of this site, that block wall is a mandatory measure. So, yeah, if it does happen, it'll. Oh, actually, in our cost estimate, it is in phase 1. So,
Is there a place in that design to take and add a pump track similar to the one that they have down in Corcoran? Is there a place where it could be put in there if we can come up with the funds for it?
I believe there is. I mean, there could be some options of swapping some things in or out. the area where we have basketball courts and tennis courts, because some of those amenities are available in other parks in the city.
I would like, one of the things that I would really like us as a council to take and do is build the rapport with the different schools and have it and bridge that gap to where if people want to play tennis, they can go play at East Campus. If they want to play basketball, there's places that they can take and do. And it's something that we need to take and do as a council and work with the schools and everything else. And I personally will go out and target some of them if it's within the jurisdiction of what I'm allowed to do.
I believe there's an existing agreement with the schools that access should be available to the community. I think,
We need to find a ways to enforce it.
I think it's just a conversation we had. I guess my whole concern with all this is, I'm just looking at this as bottom line money. Where we get this? This is all great, but this is, in my mind, we're looking somewhere probably close to 18 million, and it's like we don't have 18 million. And we talk about phases, we can talk about all this stuff, and what are we going to do? But how are we going to pay for it, right? We just passed a revenue measure that is pretty much earmarked that revenue for the next 10 years. We have specific guidelines in place on how we're going to utilize that funding. It's a commitment that we've made to the community on how that would be utilized. We're not going to take money out of this Measure H campaign to build out Hidden Valley Park. So then the question comes into how do we pay for it? And I know we've talked about CFDs and we've talked about a bunch of other things over the last few years. I nothing more than want to see Hidden Valley Park get developed, but how do we pay for it? So, and I'm Brad, maybe I'm jumping, going a little ahead of myself here, but this is all great. I know there's strong support from some out there to have this done. Now, whether or not we get the support of the entire community to do this and raise those funds necessary, that 18 million. Now, if you want to wait till after our 10-year expenditure plan with Measure H, we can have this discussion in 2034. But we're not in a position today, by no means, to decide what type of elements that we're going to put in the park. Things could change. My colleague up here mentioned a pump track. I think that would be wonderful. 10 years from now, those might not be something that, So I guess my question to staff is, where do we go? I've always been a believer that this, I think, needs to go to the voter. And we need to form, I think we've talked about it before, forming a CFD and letting the voters decide in this community on whether or not they want to pay to have this done. If it comes back and 13% of the community says, I'm just picking a number, 13% of the community says, yeah, we want to do it, we're not going to do it. We don't have the money. So it's just something I'm throwing out there. I've always said that I would love to see this built out. I would love to see it done. But if it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. I think we have to be realistic in the approach and how we look at it. So that's my 2 cents here.
I also, I agree with Councilman Harris about how it's about the money, how much funding do we have, and I think we as a council too can look when budget comes around of allocating small portions in 10 years when the oversight committee says, hey, we've done our public safety building, we've done Station 4, Station 5, and we've fulfilled all the requirements from the Measure H, and the oversight committees is planning out year 11 through 15 down the road. They say, well, now we can start putting more money towards maybe Hidden Valley Park and that build out. But up until then, during our budget talks, we could have those conversations of over a 2-year budget cycle. We say, okay, each year, if it's going to cost us $600,000 for design and engineering, let's just fund that over a 2-year plan, and then consistently have these little earmarks throughout for the next, time allotted. And maybe, you don't know that there might be a grant for revitalizations of parks that, members of our congressmen or members of the state assembly, and Senate can, head our way, and we can qualify for some grants out there that could expedite the process. But I think, this Hidden Valley Park can has been kicked down the road for decades, and I would like to, little bits and pieces, and we can have those discussions and seeing what during our goals and objectives session of seeing like, okay, let's see, can we do just design and engineering of this new portion? What can we pay? And instead of saying we don't have the money, which I agree, the money is not there as of now, but a little bit over time can go a long way.
Yeah, I would agree, Vice Mayor. I think, I think that's the things we need to consider. I just...
Because if we're just, phase one, we haven't talked about a timeline either between these three phases. These three phases could be 20 years that we actually, have a full build out. So we might just have trees, grass, irrigation, and, a walking path. And we might have that. And if we could afford just that as a phase, hey, let's move forward with that.
I agree.
If that's all that we can get, but we're showing the community, one, that we are no longer kicking the can down the road. We're addressing it. We're moving forward. It might be at a snail's pace because the money's not all there, but we're going to do what we can to move forward and to get things accomplished.
I think the big unknowns are just the environmental, right? I mean, when this environmental study gets done, like Brad was saying earlier, I mean, there's too many unknowns. I think we need to move forward with that to get that done, kind of see what we're looking at. It'll give us a better picture of where we are. As far as amenities go, I think we're getting just way ahead of ourselves right now as far as, what amenities are going into the park. I think, number one, I think we need to get the environmental done, decide if this is even a viable project, and if it's, and if it looks like it can be, then I said we can always have those discussions, down the road. And things may change here in the next, 5, 10, 15 years as far as what goes in that park and how it turns out to be in the long run. That's my stance here.
And can we use impact fees for this any type of this development of Hidden Valley Park impact fees?
If it's, yeah. City attorney gave me a nod there. So I think it would depend on how the park is categorized potentially. I don't know if it's a regional park, if we could make that argument. I'm trying to figure out how we could categorize it and have it use impact fees or not.
Well, in order to utilize impact fees, the city would have to tie it to impact caused by new residential development. In other words, the 18 acres that is being discussed, I don't think under law the city conclude that the entire 18 acres will only be used by residents of new homes in town. I mean, many existing residents will probably utilize the facility. So I think in light of that, you wouldn't be able to fund the entire project with impact fees because some of the use of the new section of that park will come from existing residents.
Retroactively, is there, because with all the development I'm looking at across the railroad tracks, in the Lennar area, the Stonecrest area, and I mean, I'm looking over decades, there was a lot of impact fees that were collected and used elsewhere, but that wasn't used for Hidden Valley Park. And so I'm just saying, is that something that needs to be paid back in a sense that we could use, because those impact fees were used for other parks? Correct. Or other, that was not.
Correct. Under that scenario, if park impact fees were utilized, that are tied to those other existing projects, residential projects. An argument could be made that those projects already mitigated their impact because the money was used, the impact fee funds were utilized for other park improvements. So like Freedom Park was developed that utilized impact fees. I'm sure a number of projects in town, residential projects, paid impact fees that ultimately were used to develop Freedom Park.
Okay, so is there, and maybe this is a Chris Tavares question, is there these impact fees for new development on the east side of Hanford can only be used for parks on the east side of Hanford, or does it just go in this whole park impact fee, and then we could use those millions of dollars on any park in the city?
So you have to look at each specific project, residential project, and you have to determine what the impact of that project will be. So it'd be somewhat of a stretch to say, okay, we've got a housing project, a new residential subdivision on the north side of town. You require the developer to pay impact fees, park impact fees. It'd be difficult to say, okay, we're going to use those park impact fees on the opposite end of town for a new park, because the chances are the residents of the new residential subdivision on the north end of town will not go to the opposite side of town to utilize that new park. Now, in the case of Hidden Valley Park, if it's going to be a regional park, I think an argument could be made that there would be sufficient nexus to create a fee that developers would pay for residential development, because if it's a regional park, essentially a resident living in any new subdivision in the city could utilize that park.
Well, I guess my question would be, if Hidden Valley is the only, I mean, if I remember correctly, regional park, is it determined by acreage?
I believe
if it's classified as a regional park, and I was thinking it's
in the general plan. Yeah, there's an acreage assignment in the general plan.
There's an acreage assignment.
20 to 40
for a regional.
Yeah, this is 18. Plus the existing. There. Yeah.
But does it hit that 20? Because Heroes Park doesn't even match the regional park. So is that classified as a regional park? Because that's only 18 acres.
Yeah.
Heroes Park's 40 acres.
Oh, 40 acres, excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's something that Planning Commission makes a determination of what classifies as a regional park?
Well,
or
that definition.
It used to be, when I first got on the Planning Commission, it was 100 acres.
That definition is established through the general plan.
Through the general plan.
Correct.
Okay. Because I know it was changed, because it used to be 100 acres, and they brought it back down to, and this was 10 years ago.
20 plus.
Or more. I guess what I'm saying, too, is you have Stonecrest, you have Silver Oaks, you have Lennar, you have all of these, the Pinnacle homes that have collected park impact fees, and there is no park besides Hidden Valley Park in those areas of that home that those, so where did all of that park impact fees go?
I don't know.
And I'm talking over decades of their building of those locations. And what was those impact fees used on if it wasn't used for
a number?
I don't think that's necessarily true, though. We have community parks and the developments that we have.
Those are neighborhood parks.
Neighborhood parks, correct.
That doesn't go off of the park impact fees.
For the maintenance, the impact fees aren't used for the maintenance.
Those are the
LEDs.
But impact fees are used to reimburse the developers for a portion, if not all, of the parks that they put in those neighborhood parks.
Correct. It offsets the cost associated with that. Yeah.
But not 100% of the park impact fees are reimbursed, correct?
The other problem that we're dealing with, sir, is, and I think we had mentioned at a previous meeting, or I did, is that a previous council set the park impact fees at a 70% cost recovery.
Right.
They had a nexus report in 2019 that said what future land and improvements were needed, and that council made a decision to set those impact fees at 70% of what it would take to meet the needs of the community. That's why we're currently in the middle of the next park impact. Well, we're in the total impact fee study, and those impact fees are estimated realistically to increase 35 to 40%. Now, recently I met with a council member, and a council member was concerned about the impact fees on a small project that we have in town. Those impact fees are going to go up if to meet the needs that we need. And again, we'll have a lot of those conversations during the development of those impact fees. The other reminder is that the current impact fee study that states that the impact fees that are collected since 2019 can only be used for new parkland and up to 35% of an indoor recreation facility.
And that was from the previous council's decisions that they made.
Correct. That was during this as we're doing now when the consultant is coming to us, what are your parks needs? We're looking at our master plan. We're given the works. This is everything. Same thing with stormwater. We're updating those stormwater master plans and all those at the same time because it's important to get an idea in today's dollars as to what those are. And so again, I could go on and on about these things. The one thing that I think is important is we've talked a lot about having shovel-ready projects. Council at the last meeting approved the new contract with our federal lobbyist. I've had some conversations with Congressman Valadeo's office, with the lobbyist. We've competed very well. If this is parkland is very important. I think tonight we talked about the phasing. The phasing is most important in terms of elements. We can absolutely, at the very least, to have a shovel-ready project requires design and engineering, but we need a project scope to have the design and to do the environmental. Lord willing, you folks approve the item later tonight that allows us to do the environmental. We can only move forward with that once we have a project scope, what this council wants that ultimate product to look like. And it's important to note that we need to complete that zoning and the general plan amendment, and that's going to hinge on those environmental studies as well. And so our goal is to get this property rezoned to public space, and so we need several of these steps to go, and one of those is what is the vision for this council for the final build-out of the full Hidden Valley Park, because that's what we're going to need to be able to run these environmental studies and then say what the impacts are. And for instance, if Ms. Regan wants a pump track and council agrees on that, that may have a high peak volume. If you're going to have tournaments and that sort of thing, that may trigger more traffic. Once we get those reports, then council may say, you know what, the trade-off for the public around there that doesn't want the road to go through isn't worth X amenity or Y amenity, and maybe we do need to make this a little bit more passive so that we can reduce the impacts on those surrounding neighborhoods. But this council will have the opportunity to do all of that. What we need tonight, and maybe it's a subsequent study session, is some direction on what your vision is for the build-out of Hidden Valley Park so that we can keep the ball moving in that direction.
Okay, so if I understand what you just said, a previous council, before any one of us was on, established a criteria for the impact fees according to the impact fee study. Is that correct?
Correct. The current study that goes along with it.
Is that something that we can revisit? Because their criteria was new parks, not old parks, so it wasn't involved. It was not allowing for any revitalization or expansion of any current parks. But it also had 35% going to like a multi-generational center, a youth facility, senior center of sorts. Is that something that we could revisit, that we can expand on that criteria, not, that it could go to, expansion of parks, that we utilize that? Is that something that we as a council with a consensus revisit it?
I don't believe you can go back and retroactively change mitigation measures, and that's what impact fees
but
are.
We could change the policy.
Well, you absolutely will have that opportunity through the new impact fee study that we're doing.
Okay.
Not only will it set the rates, but this council will dictate what amenities are important, both on the parks and street improvements and that sort of thing as we move forward.
So it's at that time that we have that voice to say, okay, we really want a senior center or a youth facility. We're going to direct 100% of the park fees to go to impact fees to go to that. Or we could say we want to use it for upgrades to current parks, expansions of, can we do any
You would
of
still
that?
have to show a nexus with growth in the community because that's what impact fees are for. The impact fees are used to mitigate growth in the community. So you still couldn't replace equipment. You couldn't do things like that. But there is a little more leeway in terms of it, and that's where the city attorney had talked about making that nexus or that connection with, this portion of the park has been used more because of growth in this area, or as a regional park in the city. And that's, I will tell you that as a regional park, council will have much more flexibility in doing so than just a neighborhood park.
I just think and maybe I'm completely off kilter on this one, but for some reason, with all the park impact fees that were collected with all the neighborhoods around there, that money was not necessarily, and I don't have the data to back up. I'm just solely on hunch and assumption on this, that those impact fees were not used for parks in their neighborhood areas. That's just my thought and where my mind is going. And so if we have impact fees for a certain development, that has to go, is there a certain radius or a certain, like within a half a mile radius of that development that those impact fees can be used at or must be used in that area?
So the park definitions, the different types of parks and how they're defined and identified, is set forth in the general plan. So the general plan will identify what a regional park is, what a community park is, what a neighborhood park is. So based upon those definitions, that's how impact fees can be utilized.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, I don't disagree with you. I think I think the eye opener for me was the 70%, right? I mean, when the prior councils decided to set that number at 70%, they weren't even willing to address the issues of what was going to be needed to move forward. I mean, they set the bar so low that here we are, and we're dug in a hole now. We're trying to figure out how do we get out of this hole. We don't even have enough funds coming in to cover what we need.
And that 70% was not even considering what our current status of our parks were.
Yeah, and current costs and development and all that. Yeah, yeah. So it's just like, we're down here like trying to on our way out, trying to figure out how do we get this done. I love the idea of moving forward, and I support. Let's get the environmental done. I think it kind of gives us a great idea of a starting point. And like
I understand I went through a different rabbit hole that I probably...
No. You brought up a great point.
I think it's a discussion that we need to have is like, how are we using these park impact fees? We have, $5-6 million of park impact fees currently. What are we going to do with that money? And if we could utilize future monies, it's my understanding these current impact fees, that $5+ million is slated just for that criteria. And anything that we as a council change and will address any future impact fees. So we're currently locked in of what our park impact fees are right now. Am I understanding this?
Yeah, at 70%.
At 70%. So the council that did that.
So I think we're all kind of on the same position here.
I'm being educated. I'm just trying to educate myself on making sure I understand, if we're going to be dealing with the funds that we currently have, what we could use them for, what we can't use them for, and how do we move forward to implement something that has been kicked down the road many, many times before. And I think we went on a side tangent.
So my understanding is, Brad, you're looking tonight, direction from council, how to, whether to move forward with the environmental study. And that'll come up later this evening.
Correct.
Right, to fund that. And then you'll come back to us after with the funding strategies as far as how we can, potentially phase this project in and get things going. But we'll have a better picture after that study's done as far as costs and, what we can do and move forward. Is my assumption correct?
Yeah, the funding strategies that's proposed on this slide is a beginning to look at the different funding strategies. Just real quick about the Trust for Public Land. This is what they do nationally. They were something like 36 out of 37 on park special initiatives and votes over the country. Their task is to grow parkland, grow green space in the nation in a lot of different ways. They did a finance feasibility study that began to lay out, okay, you have a master plan with $60 million worth of needs. How do we get there? Right? They laid out some different things. CFD was one of the strategies. They are happy to come back at no cost and update that to the new Measure H that came about. Not that that's part of this, but to look at if you did a community-wide CFD, what does that even mean? You know, divided by the number of parcels.
Right.
You get into all of that. So this is, again, just the beginnings of strategies. Like we're going into a game, and we need some strategy. We need a little bit of a game plan. So this is a pretty easy kind of step to kind of move. I think the environmental studies are absolutely needed and necessary. Without that, we're pretty much stuck. We can run parallel with an updated return to council. Now we've got the studies. Now we've got some potential new strategies. Let's look at that. Let's consider those. Some we may say no good, and then move to the next step. But, you know, per council's direction, we want to keep this moving forward. And so I believe we've received direction, and I know we'll do public comment in a moment and any other further questions that council has, and take that direction, move forward. Again, later tonight, you vote on the environmental, very key piece, and then we move forward from there.
I've got a couple of questions, please. Is Hidden Valley Park, this expansion, is it considered a new park or part of the old park?
Good question. We see it as an expansion of the existing.
Does that change anything as far as funding?
Let me see. I think I understand the question because Greg just asked it up here too. If is this a new park?
Well, I'll have the city attorney weigh in, but for the purposes of the state and federal funding mechanisms, it's not a new park. That's why when we did Prop 68 and all of that, we do not qualify. Brad's tried for numerous funding sources, but they will not see it as a new park.
So even after the rezoning, it's still not a new park?
Correct. Their definition is it's an expansion of an existing park.
Okay, so why couldn't we use impact fees, future impact fees for that?
Go ahead, sir.
So under the existing park impact fee study, park impact fees can be utilized to create new park land. So I think for a regional park, because it'll serve the entire city, I think it would be legal to utilize impact fees. But the key issue is that each development, each residential development that has to mitigate its impacts is only responsible for mitigating its fair share of impacts. And it gets back to what I was talking about earlier, that a regional park, a lot of the city's current residents are going to utilize that, meaning new development isn't going to be the only people, new residents aren't going to be the only people in Hanford utilizing the expansion. And therefore, under the U.S. Constitution, it would not be legal to essentially put 100% of the financial burden of this park expansion on new development. So as part of the process, and it could occur through the impact fee study, it would be to determine what the fair share of new development will be with respect to the expansion. And it could be a somewhat low percentage. So the answer is yes, I think impact fees can be utilized, but impact fees will not fund 100% of the improvement.
I think something else to possibly think about here is if it's a new park and it's 18 acres, it would no longer meet the definition of a regional park, and so the sort of scope of the impacts might be smaller because you're no longer, regional parks, you can assume a citywide impact, right? It's a large park, everyone in the city might use it. We would have to look at if it was an individual park that was 18 acres, it would be a community park.
I think design will come into play. I mean, how integrated are the
between the two parcels?
Yeah, two portions.
And could we, because this is a youth facility, because we're having baseball fields, basketball fields, all that stuff, could we utilize that 35% for a youth facility in our park impact fees?
No, no, not under the current, impact fee program.
It has to be a building?
Yes, the report references an indoor facility. Specifically an indoor facility.
All right.
And the other side of it, and when you talk about a design issue, is as you folks have talked tonight about possibly not having uses that generate more traffic, then those types of uses will also generate less users and have less potential to draw regional people to that park and justify our ability to use impact fees on that project. So it's kind of a damned if we do and damned if we don't. And so those are just all the things that we need to weigh out.
I'd be interested too, and this is probably at the wrong part of the agenda, is learning more about what our current impact fees can and cannot be used for, the revenue that, or the interest that we're making off of the $5+ million that we have in our current impact fees. Where does that go? Does that, it stays in the fund, but can it be used for anything else? Or I'd be interested, and I can address that during the agenda, but I don't know if our staff has even finished their presentation yet because we've gone on.
Well, I have one more
Mr.
question.
Martinez has one more question.
In regards to the phases, phase one.
Yes.
What was the projected cost for this?
About over $5 million.
Does that include the wall?
That does include the wall.
Okay, so that's now. You mentioned artificial turf.
That was all the way phase 3. That was at the.
Yeah, but why can't we just have grass?
No, phase 1 is grass.
Phase 1 is.
So what you see here, and we put the red lines around because the focus.
Okay, excuse me.
Phase 1 is very much just on the existing vacant 18 acres. Not other than the pathways, really not doing anything on the existing parkland. So what you see there, Mr. Martinez, that gray area is natural turf, open area. You can draw lines any way you want to.
That includes also parking. Is that correct or not?
Small parking. So what we did, again, trying to keep costs down. Much like many schools' master plan. As they grow, they get bigger. So what you have here, because we believe parking is absolutely an issue at this site. We have the one parking lot, Courtner, very limited. We don't want to impact, the neighborhood. So we feel like we need something central, and that's where you see that that center tree line there of 50 spaces, minimal. And again, the environmental will dictate what we need to do, but we classify that whole green area as natural turf, flat grass, irrigation, trees, trail, restroom, because we believe the existing restroom is pretty far away here. And we would do bridges over the People's Ditch. We would not pipe it as we've talked in the past. So very basic, very lean. and basically doing, I believe, somewhat, I wouldn't say the minimum, but a real basic park, passive park. Passive park, but could be used for a number of activities.
It's more than what we have there now.
Correct.
Brad, I have a silly question for you. Based on this budget that you're looking at, how much of that is the trees and the bushes? I mean, could we take and cut out some of those to keep the cost down to start, and then add more
Fairly
trees?
minimal.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Okay.
Infrastructure of irrigation and your paving, your parking lot, all those things are your major costs.
Okay.
Block wall that needs to go around there.
Council, if I can add just some context, because I know it's, Brad, to his credit, in the staff report had all of the funding, the full build out, and when it get to my level, I removed all of that because it's tough for folks to envision that something like this is going to be greater than $5 million. But by comparison, tonight we have the Bob Hill Sports Complex improvements, which is a small amount of asphalt, some concrete pads, a concession stand, and some restrooms. This has 2 restrooms, and it's over $1.5 million for the Bob Hill complex. So you now take an 18-acre parcel with the parking, with the concrete block wall that's required around the entire southern edge of the park, and probably on the western edge as well, and you see why that minimal first phase gets us greater than $5 million in cost and city money.
And just to add on to that as well is if the environmental reveals that other mitigation measures might need to take place, the street needs to go through. I mean, those are additional costs that we'll know more about them once the environmental process is.
So Jason, in the staff report, I guess or either you or Brad, the very last paragraph that's in there, it talks about design can commence concurrently with the environmental studies, but only if council provides clear direction on a final design first. We talked earlier about we can do these in pieces, right? Some we can do concurrently, some we can't. So it says generally 8 to 10% of the total project budget is required for design services. So if I'm kind of reading this right, I mean, tonight before us will be the approval of the environmental. Once we get that back and we kind of know if there are any mitigation issues that we need to take care of, we'll know at that point in time where we are, and then from there we'll be able to have our discussion as far as design concept, changing amenities or whatever the case may be. I mean, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And so I'm thinking to go off of 8 to 10% of a $5 million project, we're looking at $400,000 to $500,000 in design, and that would be something that possibly, excuse me. No, the $5 million. Whether it's just this $5 million, is this the base?
We would need to design the full project and that scope to be able to then ultimately put together the phasing. So you have to pay for the full design up front.
And that goes for so the environmental as well. Like once we had the full build out, you're sort of locked. I mean, you are locked in to that scope for the environmental.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on. Staff? I'm sorry, I haven't finished. Sorry. Staff, go ahead.
Well, I believe we have public comment on this item, or if there are other questions from councils. We did. We ended up, I think, back to where we kind of started. And yes, we've received direction from council on some of the phasing, some modifications, some things that some of the council members would like to see added, would like us to look at, things to think about. We talked a lot about the funding options, and the hard question is, okay, how do we move forward in making, it's an idea, a concept, making it reality. I think we're on the first step in a long journey, including this evening when we go propose for the environmental. we can move forward under council's direction of having the Trust for Public Land kind of dig in a little bit deeper and return with a revised feasibility study, financial feasibility that will lay out the different funding mechanisms. And there's a few. There are a few different types of funding mechanisms. And so I feel clear that we've received that direction thus far with council's input. And this concludes. My last slide was, I think we've already gotten to part of that, is the questions, and we've had several, and a very good discussion.
Any questions, council? Okay. At this time, I'd like to open it up to public comments. Anyone who would like to make comments on this item, please come forward, state your name and city of residence, please.
Before you start my time, I want to ask a question, please. The wall that you all been talking about that you have to build for noise mitigation?
Correct. I believe so.
The wall that you said in that drawing?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There's a wall that has to go up on the south side of the park?
Side and the west.
Where the road is?
Correct. So our municipal code requires that we have a concrete wall between public space and residential.
Did that just change?
No, it's been since at least the last general plan, which had been 2017.
Okay. All right. William Harmon, Hanford. Okay. Kind of crazy. The noise that the park makes, if it's a park, is music and people having a good time. Lived there for almost 40 years, and I've listened to it. And that's the only noise. Now, when you get into making this park a athletic park, which it is not, it's a public space park, then you have all the noise and parking and all the other problems that you all are trying to deal with and mitigation and all this other stuff. It's not necessary. It's not an athletic park. It was never designed to be. The one that's there right now isn't really an athletic park. It's a green space. Highly recommend that. Parking. You park like this. I'm just showing you. All along Hidden Valley Park. All along that area that is now going to be part of that park. There's a few spaces that you actually pull in and can park in the old Hidden Valley Park. It makes no sense to put parking inside a park when we've worked so hard to get it back, when you can just widen the street that's not going to have houses on this side any longer and park, I don't know how many, from that cul-de-sac area where you can spin around and then park all the way across or past the 18 acres. And you could change the other parking along the street to accommodate, and it would be plenty of parking because it's not an athletic park. Okay, currently, we're having difficulty with Hidden Valley Park being a clean park with green grass instead of the brown. And those items that are in the slough area, it's pretty bad. I don't think we need to inundate the Parks Department with more trees, more shrubs than necessary to get a green space, the whole thing, with trees that's shaded in the summer, with picnic tables. I don't think we need much more. Park benches and the running track and the bike path that we have already asked for. We don't need to turn this in to a roundabout. It's simple. We've asked nicely for so long just to have Hidden Valley extended to what was given at the same time, that land. It makes sense to use common sense since we don't have a lot of money. We have very little.
Good evening. My name is Mickey Stoddard. I'm a resident here of Hanford. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. Welcome to the new council member. I've spoken before this governmental body, several other governmental bodies, including the Planning Commission and the Parks and Recreation Commission. And I checked my computer this evening for a combination of over 30 times about Hidden Valley Park. And I'm sure that there have been others who have appeared before this council who have spoken much more than I have. We've spoken about the expansion of Hidden Valley Park. And I truly believe that the long-term goal when Hidden Valley Park was first built was to have a 40-acre park. During all the different times that I attended governmental meetings, in no time did any of the speakers who were in favor of bringing this land back to its original use as a park, have we talked about soccer fields, lit fields, baseball fields? That's never been an issue. All we ever wanted was a park with picnic areas, barbecue areas, place to walk in the park, generally enjoy the park with your family. Building walking trails, bike trails, and hiking trails was the overwhelming request in the 2019 Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Those hiking trails could easily be integrated into the existing park once we start to develop the back 18 acres. I would request that you don't overthink this, don't overplan this, and certainly don't overspend on this. Just build a park with picnic shelters and playgrounds, equipment, splash pads, restrooms, so that these people that live in this community can enjoy the park that they thought they were going to have 40 years ago. When I looked at the park general plan of 2019, I noticed that the 12 months prior to that survey, when people were asked which park they use, 61% of the people surveyed used Hidden Valley Park. All we want is a mirror of what exists right now. Take those plans that must be in some archive that we have of Hidden Valley Park and do the same thing in the back 18 acres. Thank you very much for your time.
Mark Prater, Hanford. First, I'm going to use a little of my precious time to commend the staff. I know you've worked hard on this, and it shows a lot of thought. So I'm not knocking your efforts per se, but I agree with the other speakers. I think it's overblown. It's going to cost way too much money. People say, well, we don't represent the public. We're just 6 people that get up here and speak all the time. I've heard this time and again. I've talked to more than 1,000 people personally on this issue in gathering the initiatives. In front of Walmart, door to door during the summer. Mickey talks to people all the time. He's a former Parks Department employee. Bob talks to hundreds of people all the time. Ernie talks to people. He lives right by the park. So, we have a good feel for what the public is thinking. And, I just get this sickening feeling that this is going to be killed by over-planning, over-development. I told the council, I sent the council a video of David McDonald Park in Clovis at Sierra and Temperance. In the early 2000s, they built the park for $655,000. In today's money, that might be a few $1 million. Okay, I haven't done the math, but it's a 12.6 acre park. It has walking trails. It has trees. It has a restroom, which was added later at an additional cost. It has a stage. Okay, so, other cities have done this. Fresno has lots of small parks. You've got lots of models out there of how to do this. And I'm with Mickey. We need grass. Just keep it simple. You need to listen to what we're saying. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jack Schwartz, Hanford. Just a couple questions that came up for the presentation. The first question is, there's going to be moving the dog park, but I didn't see any parking by the dog park. Most folks who bring dogs don't want to have to walk a long way through the park to get to a dog park, so it makes sense to have parking by the dog park over by the railroad tracks. Second question has been touched on by folks, and I would like to see a comparison of how much of the public survey, I know there was done, the desires in the public survey are met with what is being planned here, or whether this is being overplanned. I know there was at least one survey when there was the general plan amendment or whatever it was. There may have been another one after that, I forget. And then the third question is, what would be required to make the pond large and deep enough to have fish survive, and what species would be stocked? That pond, I don't know whether it has fish in it or not. It has a lot of geese. But you can't have a shallow pond and have 110-degree weather 30 days in a row and expect the fish to survive. Clearly, you're not going to have trout. So while it's a nice idea to have a fishing pond, it's got to be done in a way that the fish survive, or you won't have a fishing pond. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Victor. I'm a resident of the city of Hanford. I wasn't going to speak here today. I came to the study session regarding the Measure H portion of the agenda, but I just wanted to say my times growing up going to Hidden Valley Park was really only for the volleyball, the sand volleyball pit, where me and my friends went for recreational activity. And so that's where it keeps coming up in my head. Recreational activity, soccer, softball, baseball, and opportunities for our youth is our it's our biggest responsibility. It must be our guiding principle. It must not be what me, a 28-year-old, wants, or anyone else older than me. It's what's best for the youth today. And I know that that's going to upset some residents of Hanford, but we cannot consider to think of what we want and just what we want, but we have to consider what's best for the youth of our community. A pump track is a beautiful idea as an addition. Pickleball courts over tennis courts would be my opinion in that setup. But what can we do to get our youth more active? As a coach, as a youth softball board member in our community, as a basketball coach in our community, I know every day that we need to work to make our kids more active, and to give them more opportunities is a requirement. It's a requirement to sit in that seat up there. It's a requirement to be an adult in our community. And so we cannot ignore that. And so I truly look to you in hope that you take that in consideration. Our youth deserve everything. And if it requires overplan the hell out of it, because our youth deserve it more than anything. If it costs too much, our youth don't cost too much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Ramos. I live here in the city. I've been coming to this podium for 10 years and discussing this particular issue. And 10 years ago, that park, population-wise, was in North Hanford. And that was the argument. Why do we need a 40-acre park in North Hanford? Well, funny, as the years went by, and I looked to the north of the park, all these homes have been built. To Fargo, to Flint. What happened to all those impact fees? Never came back to the park because they always wanted to sell it. So my thing is, it's not now. It's more central population-wise, in Hanford. There's a lot of population to the north, so that makes that park pretty much a central park through the city. I believe that we should determine how much money in the budget that we have and build something that fits that budget. Very basic, very, that's what we want, a basic park. All these other things are nice, but they cost lots of money, so much that we have to reject it. So just be basic. In fact, the dog park is in addition to what we want. Leave it where it was or is. Leave the dog park there and eliminate some costs there and space, and maybe eventually move it. But at this point, be very basic with asphalt walk-arounds, few trees, irrigation, grass, maybe restrooms in the future, but just a basic park that the people want from that area that I've talked to over the years, and generally the people of Hanford. And we need more parkland in this city. So take it step by step. Very basic, and add to it as time goes on. And I think the people would be happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Kim Harmon here. First of all, Travis, remember we went to the Hidden Valley Park and we had to put the dots on all the plans for that park? What year was that?
22.
22. Here we are 2 years later. We haven't done nothing with that park. And as far as what we need a walking park. You know, I've suggested before, do solar cover. It'll offset the cost. And I don't think we have enough for the seniors. Okay? I know we want to do youth, but I walk over there. I have to go to the other side of town for aerobics in the summer camp, and then on breaks for the high school, you got guys over there with their basketballs. So really, I think more senior things might want to be done over there, like a walking track or something to do aerobics or another volleyball thing over there. Dog park. Why would we move the dog park? It's already been suggested that we need parking. There's parking near the dog park, so I don't know where that idea came from. End of Rogers Road right now does not get the care it needs. We have residents over there have to call the city. Can you come? Can you mow? Can you get the leaves? It's not taken care of now. So we need to start small where we can actually have it taken care of and grow from there. I love the idea about the pond, making the pond bigger. I've talked to people. I've talked to families with little kids. They would like to go fishing. That's something the whole family can do. And the walking track, I heard it was going to be asphalt. I think we should do like the tracks around the high school. Whatever that material is, I think that would be better suit. I'm done.
Thank you.
I use Champies, but I've wanted to do that for a long time. Judy Scott, Hanford. I think this is a case of be careful what you ask for, because you're going to get much more than you ask for. Yes, this has been coming into fruition for as long as I've lived here. I've listened to it. I've listened to the pros and cons. I've listened to the history. I've listened to everything. I think phasing is great. I don't want you to forget about the kids, though. Kids just need a place to go play around, kick the ball. They need a basketball in that side of town. They need a basketball hoops. Basketball is the kind of sport that you can play with one person. I can go and I can play by myself, and I can have just as much fun, or I can play with 5 or 6 of my buddies. And I think that's I think I'm going to echo what Mr. Chavaria said about getting the kids outside to play and getting them off that thing that we all hold in our hands. And the more we get them out there to play, the better it is. And I just really, I understand about all the residents around there. When they first started talking about this, I'm going, they're not going to like it because there's going to be more traffic, there's going to be lights, there's going to be more everything. And maybe what they envisioned is different than what we envisioned. But walking trails, places for kids to play, those would be my two most important things. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Hearing none. Okay.
Last minute.
Okay.
Sorry, I had a doctor's appointment, so I had to leave, so I didn't get to hear this whole discussion. Jim Castleman, 2045 North Burrell Drive. I live here in Hanford, California since 1976. Congratulations, Mr. Martinez, on becoming our new mayor. Thank you, Travis, for the 2 years that you spent as mayor. And congratulations, Kimber, as being elected to the city council. And Mark, hello. How are you doing? So just, I think it keep it simple. I'm a simple guy. I think kids like simple things. I think grass to play on and maybe some simple things to play with is good. People like to sit on benches and sit at the park and watch the kids play. I think keep it simple. 2020 master plan, almost 70% of this community asked for trails. And I think just a rectangular trail is not what they're talking about. I think an interesting trail through Hidden Valley Park and maybe both sides of the park when it happens. I've walked at Freedom Park for years until I've had some trouble with my legs right now, but it's nice to be out walking in the trees and around and some interest in the way that trail is designed. So I don't think you need a whole lot. I think trees and grass and some things for the kids and some trails, and I think everybody's going to be happy. And I think, you're going to need parking and you're going to need some curbs and gutters, and that's expensive stuff. But to add more expense to it by some of the other things, I don't think is necessary. I think people will enjoy just having more green space. We have enough cement in town as it is. And so I think some green space and some trails and some things for the kids to enjoy, I think that's all it is. And I like the fact, I guess I heard that it'll be phased. And so I think as we phase, those are the important things. And then if some add-ons come along the way, then that can happen. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for your service to Hanford, California, one of the greatest cities in the Central Valley. Thank you.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, at this time, we'll close the public comment section. Sorry.
Thank you very much for those many public comments. Very interesting. What I heard throughout, common theme, is phase one. Because what you have in phase one, you have walking trails, you have open space, natural turf fields, you've got trees, you've got picnic benches, you have some parking. I do think as you get down towards the railroad tracks, parking becomes a little bit harder. So, again, it's going to be based on the environmental studies and what will be needed to do that. But we have connected the trails to new trails in the existing park to expand the trail network at this expanded Hidden Valley Park. So what I heard a lot is keep it simple, keep it basic, and in reality, it's confirming phase one. And again, one restroom, two restrooms, that's easy. But don't forget, we need to design an infrastructure for a phased-out park if we're ever going to do a phased-out park. So that's the, I guess, part of the question is, does it end here? And if that's council's direction, that phase one, there's your scope. If we get down the road, 10 years from now, and man, it would be nice to do this. Again, this is built in to expand the parking lot if that need arises, to add lights if that need arises. So if this is the primary scope, again, based on council's direction, then that gives us more of an idea of how we need to proceed. But that's the direction from council.
I have a question. When I'm looking at that phase one right there, I can't see necessarily trails. Is it underneath, kind of hidden underneath the trees? And does it go all the way around? Because on the north side of it, I don't see it connecting.
It's very difficult to see here. On this phase, we have two footbridges going over the People's Trail. I wish I had my pointer here, but there it is. So you can see it connecting kind of to the west side or the south side of the slough, and connecting up and then wrapping around along the sidewalk along Courtner and coming around on a loop. So you would have a few configurations. You also having it going north of the slough. Again, it's very difficult to see. So you have some flexibility on where you'd walk, and you could do one lap this way and one lap the other way. Okay. And you would have the backside of Hidden Valley Park now has got some swales and some hills. It's very nice on the backside. And so we'd like to be able to keep that, that feel to it where it's not a straight flat trail. It's you're kind of a bit one with nature, so to speak. And it's pretty quiet along that backside.
Brad, what's the yellow area?
Yellow area.
The cream colored.
That would just be either grass, DG. Again, if we were going to come back at some point and expand a parking lot, do you want to expand it into DG? Do you want to take out turf to do that? It's a little bit, gives us that flexibility of someday that's where the 200 space parking lot could go. And it just gives you that option to be able to expand in 10 years, whatever that time frame is. But again, don't overly get caught up on colors. This is all moving and adaptable and the ability to modify. We could make it all grass around. But remember, the People's Ditch does bifurcate the two sections currently.
Okay, but if we wanted to, think of like if that were a house put on a lot, you could take and scoot that green park-like area, the green, that could be scooted over so you have more area at one side, like if you were building a house where you wanted
absolutely
parking. So you could take and move that over to where you're leaving a bigger area if you did want to take and do something else. Okay.
Very easy.
Okay.
For clarification, I think the purpose why it sits in the middle like that is this was phase one of an eventual one where you'd have a parking lot. We didn't want to spend the money on the grass or sod or whatever it is and then go back later to remove it to put in the parking. I guess, to simplify what Brad said, if this is the final build-out and what this council envisions at the final build-out, we'll go forth with that. But to make a small clarification, if that's what we do, you can't just add lights later. You can't just add more parking later because you're going to have environmental reports that don't envision that in the long term. And sadly, we're in California, and street parking used to be an issue. Now it's frowned upon by the state. A lot of what we do is governed by the state, and we have to get vehicles off the streets. We have to do a lot of things. The traffic impacts are going to be big. So realistically, there's one bite at the apple. And like I said, for this, from what we've heard from the residents tonight, they're happy with this. But we need that direction from council to be able to move forward and do those environmental studies.
I have a question. Is there any design that includes parking on Rogers Road?
Yeah, once you get to phase 2 and 3, it's connecting Rogers Road, but I think, earlier one of the comments is why would we want a road through a park? Well, it really isn't a road through a park. It does connect at 2 points, but you could mitigate speed by speed bumps, by turns, and things like that. And again, the central location, you could enter in that parking lot, you could go east or west, depending on what activity you were partaking in the park. If you were going to the playground, you would park and go south. If you were going to the open space, you'd go, north there. So,
well, the reason I'm asking is, wouldn't that take away from the park space itself, having the parking lot in the middle, and as opposed to having it on Rogers Road?
Well, we have to get. They don't like. The state doesn't like on road parking. They want to be just like what.
Well, they would be, but if it's, I'm not saying, like they do have on, parking spots that would go into the park itself.
I don't think on Rogers Road, I don't think those residents there would want to have cars parked in front of their house all the time. I know they do. So at Freedom Park, there's a little inlet on one portion of Freedom's Park, and there's always places where, the parents are dropping off kids for sports and all of that stuff, and they're right in front of their houses. I'm not sure,
Based on the ultimate design that council gives us direction on, the traffic study will dictate how many parking spaces we need. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily need to be one large parking lot in the center like that. There could be several, some coming off of Courtner, one coming off of Rogers Road. The traffic study will absolutely dictate what we're required to do. It will take into account a certain amount of street parking that you're going to have out there. But if you split the parking lots up, you're going to have more entrances, and under the new daylighting laws, you're going to, there's now a significant number of space where you cannot park before or after a drive entrance, and so that reduces the number of parking stalls that you could have on the street level, and so a lot of that will play into it.
Mayor, I have a couple comments. Thank you for all the public comments, because Jim, you said something, keep it simple. And it got me thinking, this is Hidden Valley Park, not Hidden Valley Athletic Complex. And so what I'm looking at, and I see the phase 3 right here, although it's beautiful, it's great, I do not foresee, I see that at a new location, kind of like where Heroes Park is going to be. I understand and I see that I'm not in favor of artificial turf. I think that takes away from the Hidden Valley, and it's also that added expense. But I don't know, watering grass, how does that come into play in taking care of the grass? I would like to kind of keep the integrity of the Hidden Valley Park and just expand it, because we're expanding what we currently have to where we have either rolling hills, we have a large grass space for, families can come and have some sort of, a family softball game, and not like an organized, where all our youth leagues, they could possibly practice and, have something, but not having organized sports where, you're having a lot of cars and you're going to need that 200, keeping it simple. I think, Ms. Harmon, you were talking about the walking path, not asphalt. The recycled tires is what the high schools do. They have that recycled tire. That is expensive as well. So I don't know, asphalt or the recycled tires, where does that come into play? But I think keeping it simple, if we have, if we go back to phase 1, we have grass, no artificial turf. That's going to be a huge savings. If we have, a 50-space parking lot, all that cream area, I'd be not in favor of, but having grass, turf there.
It would just be more open space.
It'd just be more open space, and if we have to expand the parking, that might be over a period of 10 years or so that we have to expand the parking that I don't mind taking out some grass for, that parking, but build out to make sure that that's all grass there. That's all fluid. It just looks seamless. I like the ideas of the trails, the trees, the shrubs, the benches, the drinking fountains. I think that's good, because if we activate it too much, one, it's going to get too expensive. When I say activating, build it out with the baseball, the soccer fields, all that's going to be too active, and the people around that have had peace and quiet for 40 years that they've been there is now all of a sudden, next to a sports stadium of some sort. And I think keeping it simple is probably the theme of the night that I've heard, and I'd like to kind of keep it in that direction. And what we're doing with Heroes Park is going to be pretty darn amazing with all the different components that we've seen in those sketches out there. But I'm all for just kind of keeping it simple here. Trails, benches, drinking fountains, trees, shrubs, small parking place, so where you get people off, and go from there.
I would like to throw in one little thought. Where you've got that one row of parking, if to the east side of that you added in like an extra row of parking, because initially by the time you get to the third phase, you had 3 rows of parking there. If you were to add one extra row there, you've literally expanded that much more parking straight off the top, and the cost of taking and doing that would be minimal. And then move that grassy area over more to the east so that you do leave a bigger area over closer to the railroad track. So down the road, if you did ever want to do more with that, I do like the idea of leaving the dog park where it's at now, because I can't see the reason of getting rid of a dog park. I mean, if down the road we ever add an extra dog park, fine, but I wouldn't take away what we've got. There's no reason in getting rid of it. But other than that, I think that's my opinion. But I mean, I like what Travis is saying and everything. Keep it as simple as we can, where we aren't, 57 years from now, somebody else is still trying to get a park. I would love it if we could take and actually get it done and find a way to take and come up with a budget to take and do it. And even if we have to take and eat this elephant one bite at a time, just get it done so that it's not just kicking it. Because I remember a long, long time ago, Simon Lackridge coming to me and asking me to help him reverse the fact that at that time they were taking and selling the land or wanting to take and do it. And we did. And that was back whenever my kids were little. And now my daughter that was in 4th or 5th grade is now 38. So, let's get it done. And then we can take and focus on Brad's dream park over there and make it all pretty.
Boy, have times changed. 2 years ago, I sat in a studying goals into study session, and somebody came and told us, you're planting a seed for a tree you may never sit under. Remember that? We're not planting a seed for a tree we're never sitting under. Planting tomorrows. Where tradition meets tomorrow. What are we doing here? Do we live by this or not? Do we agree with that or not? I mean, we've got a bunch of different people with a bunch of different ideas, and I love it. And I agree, keep it simple. But is that what we do? We keep it simple? We just do everything simple the rest of our life and just do the bare minimum and move on? And then 20 years from now, when my grandkids, or your grandkids, or our great-grandkids, that's what they're going to have? Or do we plan for the future? 20 years from now, I'm not going to be here. I don't mind keeping it simple. If the community wants grass and trees and benches, let's do it. In a walking path, I'm all for it. But when you do this environmental study and you find out there's things that got to be done, if you want to move forward and do something different in the future, you're just wasting money. Is that what the community wants us to do, is waste money? Wasted almost $700,000 on a downtown project.
I think it was 1.5, wasn't it?
we can waste money if that's what you guys want us to do, or can we plan for the future? I'll support whatever council wants to do. They want to go green space, park benches, trees. Brad, go forth and conquer. We can have it done in probably 2 years. But I don't think that's what we envisioned as a community. I really don't.
It's a lot better than what we've seen for the last 40 years.
Well, you know the reason why? Is because the people up here couldn't stand to make a decision. That's why. When they agreed and they said, let's do 70% of the impact fees. When they wouldn't address the other impact fees and things we talked about earlier. I mean, we spent an hour and 45 minutes here talking about this. I don't care what we do. I want to see it done. I agree with you. I think we all agree we want to see something done. But what are we doing?
Well, that's what we're doing.
I mean, you know, Brad, I have a question for you. When we did these community outreach sessions, how many attendees did we have?
Ooh, in person, I'm going to guess we did 3 at the park. I believe we brought a big tent out. I'm going to guess maybe 30 people came to those 3 different events, 30, 40 approximately. We did an online survey in addition to that. So I think, Brian, do you remember the total? About 500 respondents total, in person and the online. That's a guess, but that's...
And those responses were what we based this on, correct?
Yeah, we heard from those folks. We had some sports folks there. We had folks, and you know, trails and walkways have come number 1 across every survey, every study we've done.
Lighted too.
Lighted. And so, yeah, it was much of, you know, again, the question is passive versus active park. Mm-hmm. Really, when you look at classifications of parks, passive versus active. There's not a wrong or right answer.
Describe passive really quickly.
Passive is somewhat what you have right now at Hidden Valley Park. Yes, there are playgrounds. Yes, there is a splash pad. Okay. But the whole backside, the pond area, is very passive. That means great places to sit under a tree, read a book. Take your lunch out there, sit in the shade, enjoy it. You want to play disc golf, that's available on the backside. Rolling hills, kind of natural environment. It's very nice and quiet back there. Active is what you see at the playground. Kids playing, splash pads, kids moving, that type of thing. If you brought sports in, that's an active part of the park. So it all depends on, you know, and there are hybrid parks. There's some that a portion are active and portion. So there's not a wrong or right answer to active and passive. It will dictate how many users visit that park and why will they visit that park.
So how would you describe the current Hidden Valley Park area? Is it passive or is it active?
By area, if you want percentage, it's passive.
Oh, I'm just saying by area. It's a passive park.
Yeah,
right?
You go and you sit under a structure and maybe you have a barbecue. That's not doing activities.
Yeah, I think that's a decision we as a council have to make is do we want a passive or an active park?
One of the things that was explained to me or that I understand is if we were to take and focus on taking and trying to make it more of an active park, there's a possibility that we might need to acquire some of the other properties around there, which means that we could possibly have to take and acquire other residences, possibly some of the houses being purchased to take and have enough room to take and do this. Okay? Mario, explain.
I said if we had very high intensive uses, the traffic study could come back that we need to do major improvements at Kortner and 11th, and that could indicate that we need more turn lanes and queuing and that sort of thing, which could have an impact on those surrounding properties at that intersection.
The traffic, that's Correct. Traffic volumes will dictate.
All going to
improvements.
depend on traffic study.
So for that reason, I mean, I feel like we don't want to take and impact the people whose homes those are. We don't want to take and affect them in a negative way. But the city has expected us, or has wanted to take and have, the residents have wanted to have this park done for a long time. And if this is what we can afford to do, we've got to take and not live, so much of California lives outside of its budget. If this is what we can take and do, let's get it done. Down the road, if we want to take and make a bigger, fancier splash park, if we want to take and do some other things, like I said, just take and scoot that grass over so we've got a little bit more of an area to take and do some other things. I'm completely against opening it up and having it driving in from the south area, because I feel like ultimately you could take and have people that take and try to make that driving through there, and I feel like it could put kids at risk. But I like
safety.
Yes, for the safety of the kids.
That's why I was asking if we have that right to close off and gate off, because at 10 o'clock when the park is closed, we could gate that off, or have like the triangle gates that we have at the Bob Hill Sports Complex, that people can't just use that as a thoroughfare. That's kind of like a thought as well.
But kicking the can down the curb, I feel like that's something that the public does not want us to do. And I feel like it's time that we take and stand up and just get it done. And it may not be something that's going to make everybody happy, but I know that I've seen the project and everything that is designed for the Heroes Park, and it's going to be pretty amazing. Let's get this done, even if we're doing it on a smaller budget and a smaller way to take and do it. We just need to get it done, is my thought.
So what I sense is we want passive area. We want a walking trail. We want trees. We want green space, parks, and benches.
In essence, phase one.
Lighting.
I don't know. Do we want lighting?
Yes.
No, I would like
path lighting.
I would like path light.
Path lighting.
Yeah, path lighting. I don't think we should have the big lights like for a baseball game or something like that.
Path lighting.
Lighting. I'm good with that.
Yeah, more
so passive.
Passive, yes.
Green area.
Path lighting.
And I'm sure the parking lot would be lit, right?
Yeah, I think the parking lot would need to be lit for safety.
Yes, I agree on that. And I'd like to expand at least to, where the current one strip of 50, that buffer between to the right by People's Ditch, expanding that to a parking lot as well.
Increases parking.
Because it goes up against People's Ditch right there. I could see that having that too, and that would add the parking, get people off, because we do have, and if we think about it, and what Mr. Cifuentes was saying is that this Cortner 11th Avenue entrance is the only entrance. Well, actually, no, that Glacier can come in off of Fargo. Glacier can come in. So there's entrances, and I was thinking that there was only one entrance and exit.
I guess my concern is we add the additional parking. You only have one way in, one way out.
Of that additional parking, yeah.
On the Cortner. So I guess, and that's where the environmental and traffic study is going to tell us we're going to have to connect it to Rogers Road. So
it might not be. I think connecting it to Rogers Road would because how big that park is. But I also would like to have some sort of, maybe potential of those where we determine when people are coming in and out through there. But
no,
I don't think
I'm just saying access in and out of the park.
Yes, and I don't. Yes,
because if there was an emergency and you got 200 cars parked there and they have to get out of there and one way in, one way out, that could really be ugly.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm sorry.
It would be 100 because there's 50 now. If you add one more row, it would be 100. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what the guidelines are for that. I'm okay with that.
The environmental will dictate exactly the parking that we.
So it looks like we want a passive park, green space. If I'm reading the room right.
And I agree. I mean, right now, if we're looking at money and we're getting things done, I think passive right now, building up with some, the electrical infrastructure, the water infrastructure that needs to be. I'm not sure what other infrastructure we need.
Water, sewer, and power.
Water, sewer, and power. Yeah.
You're going to put that in now?
Well, if we're going to have a restroom, we're going to need
have
sewer
to.
infrastructure.
Yeah, we're going to need it.
If we have 2 restrooms there,
So then we've just added. Yeah. See, this is where
well, I'm
looking at the experts.
I'm looking
here.
at phase 1, and phase 1 has restrooms. So
I know,
that's
I understand, but I understand that, but I'm just looking at the experts, and we're talking about money, getting it done, and getting it activated, which I'm all for. I know the community wants it. I'm support that. And now we're going from a simple passive park area to something much more complex.
There are also necessities for the park.
Much more complex.
People, if they're passive, they still will need.
Well, and the state calls those support features. So you're supporting the uses of the park with parking, with restroom, benches. You know, you're supporting. The state calls the other stuff amenities, and then you have support
These are definitely
features.
support.
And those are the hard, you know.
Well, the environmental tell us, how many restrooms we need. It won't go into that detail. We will just.
We'll determine that.
Potential uses of your open space can vary greatly. If kids are, let's say, practicing soccer, baseball, football, whatever they do, practice space in the city is a bit limited.
Yes, it is.
Currently, it is. We have our sports complexes, but practices that some teams now are practicing LED parks because they're simply.
And there's complaints from my constituents that, you're having 3-4, teams on their neighborhood park practicing, and that's created issues for them. They can't enjoy their own neighborhood park because of the influx of sports teams going into their neighborhood park.
Well, and parking and noise and all the things we've already, spoken about, and that's where the trouble when you take a passive park and you turn it into an active park and you don't do the infrastructure. You'll end up with those things.
That's like we've talked about previously, is we don't have the sports facilities, youth sports facilities, to support it. So that's why I think when this thing was proposed out and stepped out in the process, it would be an active park. It would provide that additional. Now, there's some people in the room that want it. There's some people in the room that don't. I get it. I totally understand it. But we've got to make a decision on.
I just think with the residents, and if we have it a complete build out as an extreme active park, that's going to put an impact on the residents as well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give my opinion here, and it's only mine. I don't think we're as far apart as we think we might be. Originally, we came to you with a phase plan. I'm hearing in the room, phase 1 tends to be the favorite. A very basic, passive, pathways, picnic arbors, a little parking lot, some restrooms, support features needed to support the open space. Right. Keep the existing park pretty close, add some pathways to connect.
Correct.
And pretty much keep it as is. Don't move the dog park. Shift the parking lot over maybe a little bit, add a couple rows, open up the open space on both sides where it's yellow.
I would say move it over as far as you can. The yellow closer to the railroad tracks so that down the road you do have that in case you did want to take and do something else.
So again, the question becomes, when we do the environmental and we scope it, are we scoping it for a full build-out, phase 3, concept S5, which the previous council directed us to move forward on, or are we scoping it simply to phase 1? That's a question, and I asked Jason here to do the additional environmental work for the fully phased. What is that, a big, huge difference?
Not really. You're still analyzing the same things. It's just a matter of volume, right? My recommendation, because I've heard several comments, in the future we'll do X, we'll do Y. if you do the full environmental on the full build out, it doesn't require you to build it out, but then you are covered for if you decide to do those improvements in the future. You've already done the environmental documents to be able to do that.
Because I know Councilman Kairos was mentioning about wasting money. You know, what would we, like if we did a phase 1 environmental and we said that, how is that compared in doing another environmental costing hundreds of thousands of dollars for another environmental? If 10 years or 15 years down the road, we would like to, you know, add more features.
Travis, or I'm sorry, Mr. Payton, the difference, I think, isn't really the cost of the environmental document, it's the cost of the planning. So you're using this environmental document to inform your decisions about what the park needs to look like and if Rogers Road needs to connect. And if you don't plan for that up front, then the back work to do it is a lot more expensive and more complicated.
I know we can't really talk about this outside of this meeting as a body, you know, obviously for Brown Act and everything. So, you know, our ideas and visions are we're on constantly evolving. I see phase 1, but I'm looking at phase 2. If we can flip over to phase 2. We lose the volleyball courts due to expanding like the playground equipment I'm seeing. So we're adding basketball courts and moving the dog park that has parking for the dog park so that they don't have to be so far away. We're encompassing or adding Rogers Road, an entrance and exit through Rogers Road. I couldn't see, council, I couldn't see anything more. The baseball backstops, you know, not saying that they have to have lights around the backstops, and that could be a lot of, you know, day, afternoon play, and not have like lit up to, I would think the neighbors having, you know, full on lights until 10 o'clock at night, and they're, you know, that could be a disruption to possible. I could see keeping the dog park at the front, but we do need basketball courts. So, I mean, I'd rather see basketball courts closer to 11th Avenue on a safety. That's probably why they're there, because of a safety. You know, it's a tough decision. I mean, and if we need to revisit this and, you know, expand on this, is that what we're doing? We have to come up with some sort of decision now, because later on in the meeting.
I think unanimously this body, after hearing from the audience, is in agreement on phase 1.
Mm-hmm.
There's no requirement that there's a phase 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. We can do a phase 1, but do the environmental for what is the ultimate build out. And as long as we include the phase 1, the studies, the environmental studies will only say that's what has to be built for that phase 1. Then in the future, should this council or future councils decide to do more, the environmental's already done for that work. You know what lies ahead. And so that can be taken into account, the true impacts that would occur to the surrounding neighborhood should a council in the future have a desire to go that route.
And that could be 10, 15 years down the road. And,
correct.
You know, mindsets or ideas may, you know, change about, they may desire to have that expanded and built out a little bit more, or maybe not, and just keep it as phase 1 as we currently have it.
Correct.
All right.
So what you're saying is we can do the environmental impact study right now to do, like, to cover phase 2.
To do all of it, but include specifically in there what this phase 1 would be, so that we know that that's the minimum would be need to be done, so we can complete the general plan amendment and get this rezoned, and then start planning for funding and how we'd move forward with this phase 1.
Got it.
Okay. Are we okay, council?
I'm okay with that.
Council? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, staff.